All right.
I say that as I'm crunching ice. That's really smart, Nadine.
You're all right.
Yeah. I think everybody is probably feeling kind of fatigued, and if you're in education, you're probably looking forward to spring break. So I just want to thank you for being here. And if you're not in education, um, you're probably not as stressed out as we all have our own stressors. What am I saying? Anyways, thank you for being here. This is our final session of Coffee and Conversations. And just to let you know, at the end of this session, sometime tonight, I'm going to upload all the PowerPoints for all 4 sessions to my personal website. And I'll be talking to Len to make sure that we get all of the recordings of these sessions up on LPC's website. So, get my Twyla, do you want to go ahead here?
This handsome young man is Len Pierre. This is his consulting company, and there's his website and his YouTube channel, and also his podcast on Spotify. And then if you, the one on the left is Len's. Is that right, Nadine, or is it the
Yes.
other one? The red one is Len's QR code, so you can go directly to his website, and the other is my friend Nadine's. It will take you to her website.
And I will probably create a new page just for the PowerPoints for these sessions. So feel free when I get them uploaded to have a look at those and share them if you like. I would really suggest if you get a moment to take a look at Len's site, because he has, if you scroll down to the very bottom, he has the resource list there, and there are some fabulous resources. One of them is on uh, writing transformative land or territorial acknowledgements, and another one which is fairly new that just came out is talking about trauma informed practices, and they're great resources. So just so you know, I'm waiting for a phone call from my family doctor, and we all know how difficult it can be to get a hold of them. So if my doctor happens to call in the middle of this, I'm going to flip back to this page, and it'll give you an opportunity to check out both of the websites here. So for my territorial acknowledgement, I just want to acknowledge that I'm on the unceded traditional territories of the Katzie First Nation and Kwantlen First Nation. I live within stone throws of both communities, and I feel very fortunate in that I've been able to work directly with Len, with Candace, with Richard, and many of the knowledge keepers from Katzie and Kwantlen First Nation. And one of my goals for continuing the work of reconciliation, even though I am Indigenous, I strive to really elevate the voice of people from these local land-based communities, and in doing so, I'm giving them opportunities to be heard. So one of the things I like to do is I post out any kind of upcoming workshops that are happening within the community by their community members. An upcoming event on this Friday that I'm very excited about is Rain Pierre from Katzie First Nation is having his first art show in Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge. So I will be
The
attending that.
official opening date is Saturday.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So yeah, so it's that, that's one of my goals, is really to elevate things that are happening within our local land-based nations. And Twyla, do you want to share where you're from?
I am in the South Surrey White Rock area, so that would be the Semiahmoo territory. I've participated in many meetings in all of the schools in this area, and met with the band members on different occasions, and attended the powwow and different Indigenous events in this area.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Twy. And I love this picture. This is just down the street from me, just by the Fraser River, and it sort of captures, I think, the essence of what used to happen along this river. I love that they include the canoe and fishing and salmon. I just love that picture. So this is our final session, Indigenous pedagogy. So what is it? And so we're really going to talk about Indigenous pedagogy. We talked about cultural safety last time. So what is it, and how does that affect our practice? So Twyla, do you want to share our intentions?
Okay, I was just showing you that you've got another little visitor. Molly Bear. She's also Métis. She's my kitty. She jumped up. What our intentions are is to create a safe space for the exchange of knowledge, to have honest conversations, and to support one another so that we can support Indigenous learners. We come with an open heart and an open mind. We ask that you respect confidentiality of the students and the families in any conversation, so no names, please.
I included this picture this time. This is my Uncle Ox and my Auntie Marge. I'm not sure if I've shared this before, but I'm a 60 scoop survivor. So I found my Uncle Ox when I was about 30 years old. And he has been so gracious in inviting me into his family and into the community. So this is a picture on his golf course up near William Hot Springs. You can see the beautiful mountains in the background. And his loving partner is my Auntie Marge. And I feel so grateful that whenever I need advice or counsel, that I can call on my uncle. I see him as my elder and a knowledge keeper of things that relate to who I am as a Secwepemc person. So before we start, I just wanted to showcase some of the resources that Twyla and I have talked about for this particular session. And I'm thinking that maybe some of you have seen them already. But the Aboriginal Worldviews and Perspectives in the Classroom, this came out, I think, in 2011, and it's still, I think, a relevant document today. Joanne Cronin's book is a fabulous book, and I'm hoping that each of you have had an opportunity to take a look at this book. I know that lots of school districts were purchasing the book to have book studies, so hopefully that has happened in your school district. If not, I would highly recommend it. And then the third book is Potlatch as Pedagogy. And this is by Sarah Florence Davidson and her father. And it's looking at Indigenous pedagogy through ceremony. And then, of course, I'm going to connect you to Len Pierre's beautiful PowerPoint presentation on Indigenous allyship and anti-racism. So those are just some of the resources. But before we carry on, Candice, do you want to just talk a little bit about the chat box and how that works?
Absolutely. So throughout our conversation, you're more than welcome to pop any thoughts, comments, questions into our chat box. If you would like, you're also welcome to send.
I was gonna ask you, we're not gonna have to.
Oh, okay. So if you want to send me a direct message, you're welcome to do so. If it's something that you don't want your name attached to, I will be monitoring the chat box so I can read those out. And I have no qualms about interrupting Nadine or Twyla if your question is pertinent. So use the chat box to your advantage, and yeah, I'm happy to help you when you need it.
Thanks. Did you want to introduce where you're from too, Candice?
Sure, I can do that. I keep turning my camera off. Anyways, my name's Candice. I am from Catesy First Nation and zooming in from my traditional territory. Not on reserve, but traditional territory for sure. And my current role, I am working with Len Pierre. I do consulting services, but I do also a lot of hey, Candice, can you fix this stuff from Len? So if you have comments, questions, or anything that's weird or strange, or if you're looking for services, you're more than welcome to send me an email. So Candice at Len Pierre Consulting. So that's me.
Perfect. Thanks, Candice. So Candice, Twyla, and I, and Len all used to work for Surrey School District at one time. It seems that Len Pierre Consulting has lots of us Surrey staff that has joined his amazing team. So what is Indigenous pedagogy? So this is a definition that I took from a number of resources. But basically, it's the method and practice of teaching that incorporates Indigenous worldviews. And it's different than how we typically see teaching in schools from a very colonial perspective. It's looking at including the personal, like supporting the personal and the holistic. part of us. So not just our academic performances, but we're also looking at nourishing the body and the mind and the spirit. Indigenous pedagogy would include lots of experiential learning. And I think if you're a primary teacher or you work with young ones, that's a huge part of the work that we do. But I think even as young ones and as adults, I know that one of the best ways that I learn is when I'm able to get in there and do things with my hands, when I'm learning alongside experts. And just an example of that, last fall, I was able to participate in one of my community's gatherings. We were learning about harvesting practices. So I learned about pit cooking. I learned how to make Devil's Club salve. I learned how to smoke salmon and how to smoke moose meat and how to can moose meat too. And all of these sessions were open-ended, so you could come in and stay at one particular station as long as you wanted. There was no assigned start and stop times, but there were knowledge keepers at each one of those stations. And, if you came, you were invited to participate, to help. You were also welcome just to watch and observe. So I think that experiential learning is something that has been very common in our communities, and it's a huge part of what is included in Indigenous pedagogy. Place-based learning, and why this is different than just being outside and learning outside. When we look at place-based learning from an Indigenous perspective, it's knowing that if this was my home community, that all my ancestors have always come from this land. So my community, my knowledge keepers would have intimate knowledge of this traditional territory, of its seasons, of its cycles, the cycles of the animals, the cycles of the plants and the medicines. So it goes beyond just being outside and learning on the land. It's having a relationship with the land and seeing the land as your teacher. Indigenous pedagogy is intergenerational. So we're not just seeing the teachers as those we see in school, but it's seeing our aunties and our uncles and our grandparents and elders and community members as our teachers too. And that, the example I provided about the harvesting camp is a perfect example of that. It was amazing to see little ones sitting at the table as we were carving up moose meat, and grandparents. That's a natural way of us learning. Indigenous pedagogy is also in ceremony, and it's also includes our Indigenous languages. So basically, Indigenous pedagogy values Indigenous knowledge systems and our oral traditions. So like I said, that's kind of a combination of the thoughts that I read and several of the resources I've mentioned. And I hope you know who Joanne Archibald is. She is a marvelous elder, and just so much respect for this woman. She has worked at UBC, I believe, for the longest time, and she has a great website called Storyworks that's definitely worth visiting. And this is how she kind of describes it. She says, using narrative practice or story work as described by Kwam Ihim, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, Dr. Joanne Archibald Hustalo, Indigenous pedagogies highlight the interconnectedness of all living things. Through oral traditions, stories, and land-based teachings, education using Indigenous pedagogies support a holistic learning environment and teaches about the relationality of people, plants, animals, and environment. And I really like that definition. And I think it is such a shift from what we typically see in our public education system right now. So let's look at the resources that I wanted us to use. The first one is Joanne Crona's book. And why I like this resource is, first of all, I have a tremendous amount of respect for the author. I had the privilege of working alongside Jo Crona when she worked for Surrey for a couple of years. I think we overlapped for about a year. Her breadth of knowledge in curriculum, but particularly in Indigenous education, is outstanding. And if you've ever had an opportunity to see her speak, she's a gifted presenter. And if you've read this book, you'll have a sense of what a great writer she is. Her she also speaks from experience. So Jo used to be a high school teacher. I think she's a very, very brave soul for teaching high school. And she loved English. She taught English. And so being an Indigenous educator teaching English in high schools, it gave her that frontline experience that I think makes her work so much more authentic. She worked with FINESC for a couple of years. She was a curriculum coordinator. So she brought in people to help write some of the curricular guides that they have. But she was highly involved in the First Peoples 12 and First Peoples 11 courses that have been created by FINESC. And she also has written created an amazing website that really unpacks the First Peoples principles of learning. So her breadth of knowledge is extensive. But in her book, not only do we get to hear Jo's voice, but she also talks to non-Indigenous educators. And I think that's really important. I think it's, the people that she pulled in are people who are trying to do the work around reconciliation, but are honestly sharing some of the barriers or some of their fears or some of the things that they tried. So that voice is also in this book, and I think that makes it a powerful resource. What I like about it too is that most chapters in the book will always include Jo's personal reflections. So if she was writing about racism, she will talk about a personal experience, or so she's always included her own personal reflections in each of the chapters. But why this book is great for schools or for businesses or any organization is that she has a series of reflection questions at the end of each chapter. So if this was being used as a book study, those reflection questions can be a jumping off point for discussions and for to unpack the chapter with colleagues who are engaged in the book study. I also like that she has a take action section at the end of each chapter. So this book is primarily meant for teachers and educators, but it includes suggestions for everyone, meaning you, me, and anyone in the general public, but also for classroom and learning environments and for educational leadership. And that educational leadership is probably really important because they're the ones who have the power to make systematic changes within our school districts, and connecting to them is super important. She also has beautiful resource suggestions. So at the end of each chapter, she'll have books that she would recommend that you read, and articles. She has a listen section, so she will have podcasts that she recommends, and then a watch section where you can look at videos that she highly recommends. So it is a fabulous book. So what can we take from her book? And I'm just going to take a sip of water here. So before we can do things differently in schools, there are some things that Jo says we have to acknowledge first. Probably the biggest thing that we get pushback on as Indigenous educators is when we say that racism exists in our school. I don't know how many times I've heard teachers say or administrators say there's no racism in our school. We treat everyone the same, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. But before we can do things differently, we have to acknowledge that racism exists. And we have to have a willingness to really confront that racism and say that the status quo can't continue. Now, if you think back to one of our first sessions when we were looking at some of the data from the How Are We Doing report, to see that the graduation rates for Indigenous students are significantly lower than non-Indigenous students, something's wrong. And we have to look at that. So that's that willingness to confront and critically examine what we're doing now and how it's working. And probably the hardest thing for teachers to do is to examine our own biases. And biases doesn't necessarily have to be a bad word. Neither does the word privilege. but we have to look at it and we have to talk about it. We have to think about what our own assumptions are about what it means to be a good student in a school. We have to look at our own biases in terms of how we see some families value education and others maybe we don't perceive it as valuing the same. So we have to look at our own biases. And we also have to look at the differences between equity and equality. And this is probably something that I've heard a lot in schools, that, you know, we treat everyone equally. Well, to treat everyone equally would be doing them a disservice, because if we treated everyone the same, we're not necessarily meeting everyone's needs. So we need to understand and look at that. So just some examples. Twyla, I'm going to get you to speak to the last one. So Twyla and I, we have lots of conversations. What I love about Twyla is that we've been working in the same field for so long, but I also get to hear about her husband's experience as a high school teacher, high school teacher. And so Twyla, do you want to talk to the last point there?
Sure. This was a conversation between a science teacher and the department head, and he had shared that he was frustrated because there is no such thing as Indigenous science. And the teacher went on to challenge that and said, you know, absolutely, Liz, look at the contributions and the fact that the people, Indigenous people across Canada were successful. Obviously, there's an Indigenous science. And I'd seen this at other schools as well. And it concerned me when it was like department heads, you know, saying it's very difficult to implement Indigenous content into science and math. And I just to hear that, and I know of a science teacher that was so successful at doing it, and I love what he said. He said it it's how you do it. You start with it as your foundation, and you give it the respect that it is due, and you don't make it an add-on. And he was so successful in implementing Indigenous content into science that FNESC reached out to him to be a part of developing curriculum for the province and wrote some successful units for them. So he was an example, a non-Indigenous person, you know, that it can be done and can be done respectfully and successfully.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful example, Twyla. And you know, Billy has reached out to me because he was talking, I believe, with his foods teacher, and she was thinking about how do I embed Indigenous content, and Billy was going to be doing a unit on food, so he asked if I had any resources. So I sent him the Indigenous food facts that were created. I think it was by the Fraser Health Authority. It's a beautiful document that shows the nutritional value of a lot of our traditional foods. It's a beautiful. So you know, understand what I respect about Billy and his work is that he seeks out authentic resources and makes that a prominent part of what he teaches in schools. So these are the things that we definitely have to do differently. Some other examples, and we've talked about this in other sessions, is the culture of low expectations for Indigenous students. And Jo talks about this in her book, you know, about, and sometimes it's not even done intended to do harm. So she provides an example where teachers will say something like, well, you know, we're just so happy that at least he's coming to school every day. That's huge growth for him. We're just, you know, we celebrate that. And her comment around that fact is, yes, that's a great expectation, but now what? What are you doing to help this student to be able to graduate and cross the stage with dignity and respect? So sometimes being kind and not setting those high expectations, pushing forward to do more is a form of is a form of racism, because we believe that, oh, you know, that's all the student can achieve, and we need to challenge that mindset. Yeah. And I love this diagram. So I've seen this diagram in Jo's book, and I know that Len has also used it. Jo actually tweaked it a little bit, And I'm just going to give you a few minutes to have a look at it. It's basically kind of a way to look at where you are, a rubric of where you are in terms of how you see racism in Canada and also in our schools. So just take a few minutes and take a look at that, and maybe we can have some discussions around it. Okay, hopefully you've had a couple minutes to look at that. Let's have some conversations about it. If you feel comfortable, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, and let's have some discussion here, because I think this is a really powerful rubric. Oh, thank you, Colleen, for that comment. I appreciate that. So no thoughts on this graphic?
Yeah, I like the graphic. I think it's I like the growth zone because that like kind of gives me ideas of like I feel like a lot of our time is like spent in the learning zone, kind of where it's like, I don't know, you like feel good and knowledgeable, but like maybe you're not like doing the next step or like, being an advocate or so I like the growth zone because it kind of is like a bit more forward thinking rather than just like idling kind of.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. I so agree.
I think for some people, they could almost go back into the fear zone even after learning before they head to the growth, because it's how they feel comfortable with other people. It could be like a personal, like they care about what others think, I suppose. And so they're kind of like out of fear for getting into an uncomfortable conversation. They might go back to the fear zone before they even get to the growth zone.
That is so true. And I think one of the hardest places that you might slip back in the fear zone is when you're in the staff room and those conversations at lunchtime or happen, and you overhear someone saying something that you might seem as a very racist comment. How do you address that? How do you, what do you say? And I'm going to suggest that to do more learning in this area, that you watch Len's or take a look at Len's presentation on anti-racism, because it addresses that. It's kind of the leaning in strategy, and just saying, hey, this isn't the place to have a conversation like that. But it is hard. It is hard because usually people with a very strong voice who are racist, they're the ones who aren't uncomfortable to say what they feel, and it takes a tremendous amount of courage to stand up. Seba, do you want to say something?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
One thing I just wanted to, I was reading through this and I may have missed the point, but one point that is kind of tough, I guess, is going from the fear zone into the learning zone and getting to the point of I can learn without defensiveness or guilt, or I acknowledge that, I basically know that I have biases and, racist tendencies or things like that. But then being able to do that without the almost kind of like, how do I say it? The the automatic responses in our heads or in our bodies that come up for us that almost feel like you can't just shut that off, however much you wish you could. And I wondered what, how that step would be accomplished,
And
or what thoughts you have about that.
and Len talks about that when he does his presentation, and I've also done the same thing. And it's really about, there has to be a shift and change in the leadership in the school, that we have to have a safe space to have conversations around this work, and that the modeling of that has to come from leadership. And we also talk about the importance of connecting with someone within your school network, who can support you in this work, who you would feel comfortable having conversations, maybe unpacking something that happened in the classroom, that you think might have been an uncomfortable situation. So just having someone to connect with and have those open and honest conversations, and someone too who might not call you out publicly, but say, hey, have you thought about, when you use that dated resource, have you thought about the harm it can be doing? And so this would be a person that is speaking to you and making suggestions, not because they're calling you out to put you down, but because they see that maybe there's another way to do things. So, Len talks about this a lot in his presentations, that sort of lean in and lean forward perspectives, which I think are really helpful. And, I guess for me, I've had a couple of pretty uncomfortable conversations. When I can think of, this is about 10 years ago when we were on strike, and I was on a picket line, and I wasn't at my school, and I had a really, really uncomfortable conversation with someone who was a counselor in our district. And it was not, it was not a discussion, it became an attack. So I think, being mindful of when you're being attacked, to step back and step away, because there's nothing that I could have said or done that would have changed that person's perspective. But what happened that was so beautiful, is that a kindergarten teacher stepped in and asked him to stop, that he was being rude. And that gave me a moment to kind of catch my breath. So I think, again, always having someone in your school or your network that you can discuss these issues with, I think is really helpful. But I think as a staff, it would be really interesting to look at this diagram, and there are others that are out there, and, have an open and honest conversation about it. And I know, when I first saw this, when the topic of racism started to come up in schools, I thought, oh, we've been down this road, and when you're the person, the minority, when you're who has experienced this firsthand, it's a really uncomfortable place to be. It's uncomfortable because you have people saying, well, Nadine, what do you think as an Indigenous teacher? Do you experience racism? So we're often put in those uncomfortable spots, which are never fun. But I do like that Joe has included in this book, and I do recommend taking a look at Len's presentation and going onto his YouTube channel, where you can actually hear him do this presentation. It's really well done. But
Can I just add to that, Nadine?
yes, you sure can.
With my role as a district youth care worker, I was often in a position where I needed to challenge something at the school, and what things that had gone in. Chances are I was going in because of a situation, and I was sharing with Nadine. Sometimes I felt really guarded, and I could hear myself in the responses, but that's because you get beat up enough that you get defensive and such. So I tried to be mindful of making it about the student and not about me, and but also trying to have allies, not just with my department, but within the school, and to be clear about why I was there. But it's a at times an uncomfortable position to be in, to be the one that's challenging what's going on, and I did it for 17 years. Um, there's a way to do it, and again, being mindful that you have support be it even your family at home, but also within the school, your own admin, because it's, I used to say sometimes I come home feeling bruised because of challenging something that had gone on in the school.
And Twilight, to add to that, I mean, when you look at some of our support staff, when they are experiencing, an incidence of racism, it's not a level playing field, when they're confronting an administrator or a teacher or a parent. If a parent has experienced racism, being able to bring attention to this matter in school is not easy because it's not a level playing field, and you don't always feel safe bringing these issues up. So this is worth looking at in terms of pedagogy, like being able, before we can move forward, is we have to understand that racism exists in our schools. So we're
Mhm.
going to move forward a little bit on this.
Sorry, I did want to mention, I didn't see
Yeah,
where the
go ahead.
hand up thingy
Oh,
was.
sorry, go ahead, jump in.
Just on the chart, and I'm not saying this is wrong, please don't take it that way. I can see where it would be difficult sometimes to have a conversation just on the paradigm, just the way it's featured, because
Mhm.
if you're in the fear zone, and I see this, that would have to mean that I am calling myself a racist, because way over here in this other zone, I'm not a racist. So
Mhm.
I'm not saying that, like, I understand, like, if you're
Mhm.
doing things that are unconscious that you didn't realize, oh my goodness, that was racist, I didn't realize I said that. Well, technically that makes you racist, but I can see someone being super defensive and not getting out of the fear zone if
Yeah,
they're being called racist. Do you understand?
I do understand,
But
and
that
I think
that's hard to navigate, right?
it,
Because
and
people
I
need to be open.
yes, and they have to be willing to look at their own biases and their own ways
Mhm.
and their own ways of doing things. And it's an uncomfortable thought. Actually, my husband and I were having this discussion last night, because he said, we're not racist. And I said, Meryl, I bet you there are people in your life that you're not comfortable around. And so what this work is really doing is looking at your relationships with other people, and seeing, tearing back the layers and seeing, are your feelings valid? Are you approaching that person with a bias, with your own
Mhm.
personal bias, or what? Yeah, and the topic of racism, honestly, is a difficult one, and having someone come in and work through this with your staff is so important. Someone who's experienced and comfortable with having uncomfortable conversations. And this is the hard part, because when you're in a school and you're having these uncomfortable conversations, you have to work with that person the next day. So having someone who can walk you through this and do so in a diplomatic way, so everyone feels safe. But for things to move forward, we have like, I guess how I might rephrase this is that you're not being a racist by choice. You're being a racist by not examining yourself, your thoughts, and your beliefs. Um, uh, just my thoughts. Diana, I see you have your hand up. No, Diana, did you want to speak?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I worked at a school and one of my coworkers experienced some racism from uh, a TOC towards a couple of students in their, I think it was a kindergarten classroom at that as well. And so she did start the process of reporting it, but she ended up not following through with it just because of like she was experienced so much like negative feelings around it. Like she was worried about her job, she was not feeling great about it, and like she ended up not going through with it. We were really encouraging her to do it because this teacher shouldn't be practicing, and it's not or at least learning and educating or something. And so what happens when she doesn't report it is that this teacher just gets to continue to be that way, which is not great. So I think the systems need to change for, reporting racism within the schools.
Yeah.
Sad.
When you look at, we were talking about that rubric, when you look at QP support staff, teachers, administrators, and district leaders, for racism to change in schools is we need a systemic change from top down, right?
Mhm.
And so the example you just provided, it's not, again, a level playing field. This is a TOC. She doesn't want to jeopardize maybe getting a contract in the district if she reports someone who knows what the consequences are, and that's not providing a safe place for her to report. Yeah, I'm hoping that other teachers know of this and then could maybe, even, hey, I had a conversation, and yeah, it's not easy. And that's why it takes super strong leadership. Yeah, thank you. Does anyone else have any more thoughts before we move on? And
Colleen
thank you.
has her hand up.
Yeah, go ahead. I can't see the hands going up. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see all the people either. Just along those lines, I think that what Diana was saying exists also for students. The
Yes.
student's not going to want to say anything because it's like, oh, my mark. This teacher's
Yeah.
not going to like me, right? Or whatever. So
Yeah.
they will not say anything until maybe 2 years later, until they graduate, then say something, which is kind of too late. Not too late, but might have been better. So, maybe if there was nobody wants a tattletale scenario, right? Like that kind of thing. But I think you were absolutely right, Nadine, where you hit it right on the head. Have those uncomfortable conversations, to have a process for that, or a person you can talk to can help navigate people through that, so that it doesn't turn into anything other than it's supposed to be, which is productive, right?
So true. Yeah. And Twyla and I, before when we were planning this out, we were thinking about all the incidences where we've connected with families. And when we were looking through surveys that parents do when we've had inquiries, what was the equity scan, and before that, different kinds of opportunities to survey parents. Things that I read a lot were that parents would call the school about incidences where their child was being bullied, or where they had experienced racism, but nothing was ever done. And that, I know, it just breaks my heart when I hear that and see it. And I know, Twyla, you've had an opportunity to work with
Oh,
parents,
many
advocate for.
times.
Yeah.
Just before I retired, I had a lovely parent reach out to me. Her son was in grade 10 at a secondary, and he was a lovely young man, and he had a medical condition, and he was being bullied, and mom was in tears, saying to me, "You're the first person," she'd reached out to several, "and you're the first person that responded and will help me." And we were successful in meeting with the school and addressing it. And, but I was heartbroken for her that that it had gone on that long, and that, nobody had, been assisting her. And actually, she got my name through a counselor in the school district. She had said, Twyla will help you. And again, a very conscientious parent trying to advocate for her son. And, I was grateful to be involved in that. She trusted me with it.
So you can see that tons of work needs to happen in this area. And I know lots of districts, they're hiring at district level people who are looking at equity and equity, diversity, and inclusion, and hopefully this work will move things forward. But I just wanted to mention that Jo mentions this in her book. I want to talk about, I can never say this, epistemic racism, and that it exists in schools. This word has always confounded me trying to say it, so bear with me. So what it is when epistemic racism is the valuing or devaluing of knowledge systems of specific cultures. So, in science, we hear this a lot. Well, there's no, in science, you can't teach about it. There's no indigenous content. It's when we're valuing kind of Western knowledge, Western medicine, Western science over indigenous knowledge systems. That's an example. And I see some change here, gradual change. It's also when Twyla, say it for me.
Epistemic.
epistemic racism is when we value written histories and also at the same time dismiss oral traditions. Oh, those can't be accurate. Those can't be, there's no way that oral story can have been passed down and not ever changed over years. So that's an example of epistemic racism. And it's also using curriculum content that marginalizes or misrepresents contributions, histories, and perspectives of racial and ethnic minority groups. And I think this is getting better. I mean, the push to have authentic Indigenous resources, the work of the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action has mandated that we represent the true history of Canada in our schools. So I think that's changing, but it's constant work, right? It's getting teachers to throw away those old units and do things in a different way. Epistemic racism is allowing a culture of low expectations for Indigenous learners to continue. Oh, we're just happy that you're here today. Can't be enough. We have to have high expectations for all our students. And it exists when there's a lack of representation of marginalized communities. I am now beginning to see Indigenous administrators, and Surrey School District now has Perry, and I can't remember his last name, my apologies, Perry. He is an assistant superintendent, I believe, at the district level. We need to have representation at all levels because they can afford, pardon me?
Harry Smith.
Harry Smith, yeah. And I worked with him for years on the CIA committee, and yeah, he's at such a, he will be a powerful voice. But then I think, when we get people in those positions, we really have to take care of them. And I say this from being an Indigenous teacher, and that, being in that position, the expectations of me, or I always felt the expectations of me were greater than the average teacher. I had to doubly prove that my credentials were real, that I just wasn't, given a teaching degree, that I actually went to a university and got good grades. But also, when you're the only Indigenous teacher or the only Indigenous staff member in a school or in an organization, it can be a lot to carry. So I hope, that we take good care of Perry in that job. And then she talks about the pedagogy. I like this definition of hers. She says, an Indigenous informed pedagogy is a framework that reflects Indigenous knowledges and understandings about effective teaching and learning processes and environments that Indigenous peoples in Canada have had since time immemorial. Prior to colonization, education was relationship-driven and connected to the land. It was complex, learner-centered, and rigorous. It valued authentic learning experiences and was contained within the Indigenous languages spoken across the land. I mean, that's so perfect. That's kind of her summation of what Indigenous informed pedagogy is. And I like the quote from in her book, moving from learning about Indigenous peoples to learning from Indigenous peoples. I think that's a nice kind of theme here. So you've all seen this poster probably a billion times. If you have not visited Jo Krona's WordPress document, she unpacks each of these principles for educators and talks about how that connects in classrooms. So her chapter 5, it relates specifically to First Peoples principles, and we can kind of see this as a framework for pedagogy in terms of supporting Indigenous learners in schools. And then chapter 6, she talks about authentic resources, which is good. So another resource I wanted to talk about, and I hope what you'll see when I show you these few resources is repeating themes, right? And the strength-based and learner-centered, the connection to land, learning on land. Those are important pedagogical ways of thinking. So in this book, it looks at 2 central themes, and I won't read this out to you, but it's, again, it addresses overcoming racism that has to happen before we can move forward, and how we see our learners. And in the book, this is the part that I really like, it unpacks Aboriginal worldviews and perspectives in the classroom. So these are the characteristics of Aboriginal worldviews. So see common themes, experiential learning, language and culture, traditional teachings, emphasis on identity, which if we look at our core competencies, that ties in so well. Engagement with the land, nature, and outdoors, and awareness of history, the power of story. All these characteristics of Aboriginal worldviews and perspectives is what we should be embedding when we teach in classrooms. So if you get this document, what it does is it unpacks each one of these characteristics in detail, so you have a better understanding of how that affects how you teach in classrooms. And if you're in a primary or an elementary school, these are very easy to implement. Maybe I just say that because my experience has been in elementary schools. And in this book, of course, we hear from elders and knowledge keepers. And again, there's a discussion about the importance of learning is holistic. So it's not just educating our mind, but we also are taking care of our spirit and our bodies. And that it's relational, and that it's the connectedness to ourselves, to our family, to the land, and to the community, and to our language and culture. I think it's shows that it's very similar to Joe's thinkings. So this is just one of the examples, and I'm not going to read through it, but so what does awareness of history mean as a characteristic? And this, I think if we were to think about it, we could tie it into, so what history has been shared in Canada, and how is that shifting since the work of the Truth and Reconciliation report and the calls to action? Yeah. And you can tell I'm getting a little tired. The last resource I want to look at, and I realize we're running out of time and I'm not going to do it justice, so maybe I won't. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen here. If you get an opportunity to read this beautiful book, it's by Sarah Florence Davidson and her father, and it talks about Potlatch's pedagogy. So she's talking about learning through ceremony, and she talks about that the skarada, which means to learn, but she talks about that it's impossible to teach without learning. And there are 9 principles that come through here, and you'll see some of them match to the same things that Jo says in her book, and the same characteristics that are mentioned in the Aboriginal worldviews and perspectives. I think we're going to run out of time. I'm going to stop here. Hopefully you've had a chance to take a picture of those QR codes at the beginning. I will upload the PowerPoints from the last 4 sessions, but I wonder if there's anything that kind of resonated from this very quick presentation. I always find that I have about 6 hours of content that I try and condense into 1 hour, and I don't think it does it justice, but yeah, I'd love some feedback from you guys.
I loved the whole presentation. I mean, it's spot on so many different levels. And then of course the chart. I mean, that one's there is lots of debate there, but also on the bullying too. I've just doing some reading recently. There's lots of studies how bullying is it can be addressed from a teacher perspective, but it's also a top-down school systematic approach, and having those resources of the restorative justice people, personnel, having the personnel, and then the kids knowing and trusting who to talk to, right? So if that bullying is still going on, to me, it kind of sounds like there's no system, in the school, or at least it's not, if it's there, the kids don't know about it or trust it.
And the danger is that if, say, I'm an Indigenous student and I go to my teacher and report an instance of bullying, and they take it to the administrator and nothing happens and nothing happens and nothing happens. One, it sends a message to that Indigenous student that you don't matter.
Yeah.
Equally frightening is that it sends a message to other bullies, I can do it. The school doesn't care. And that's a huge danger.
But if it has to go to the admin, that's a colonial perspective, because that's hierarchical, right?
Yeah.
There should be that is missing. The Indigenous lateral basic, it's a connection with everybody, like you had said, right?
When I did my practicum, this is 100 million years ago, I had my grade, she had a grade 3-4 class. And after recess, she would have circle and she would do appreciation and resentments. So they could sit around in a circle and I could say, oh, I really appreciate Twyla today because when we were out in the playground, I fell and I sprained my ankle and she helped me go to the first aid room. And I appreciate that friendship. On the other hand, I could also say, you know, I have a resentment. You know, I was waiting for my turn on the swing and people were butting in front of me. And so you're not allowed to name names, but you're allowed to talk about the incident. And then the teacher unpacks that with students. And I think what I liked about it is that it allowed students to unpack what happened at I think it was after lunch, so that they could continue on with the rest of the day. Because we know there are students when they feel like they've been harmed, they hang on to that and they can't let go, and the dangers of that. So, you know, I thought this was a beautiful, but it took, she was particularly skilled at it. I tried it a few times and I found it really difficult. Because you have to be willing to listen, right? And sometimes I think, well, just get over it, you know. But clearly, kids can't get over it because it's resonating in their heart, and we have to hear them out, and we have to help them resolve. So, yeah, and then the same school district, they had what they called an ambassador program, which was beautiful. So all the grade 5s received training every second Friday on how to be an ambassador. So all the grade 5s, there would be a number of them out at recess and lunch. They would have a particular colored vest on so the students knew who they were. And students could go to them if they had trouble making a friend, if they got hurt, if they were having a minor conflict with a friend, so that these ambassadors were trained to support those kids. So then the adult support staff were looking after more critical incidences. But what it did is it empowered some of these grade 5s to be in the position to have to listen and help problem solve. And I thought that was such a beautiful model. And I wish it was carried out in other districts. I'll have to write a paper or something on it and encourage it. Anyways, I am looking at the time. We are just about out of time. Any last thoughts from any of you? Selena, do you have your help? You have just comments in there. Great. I'm just in the conversation, sure. I'm just going to put my email. So please feel free to reach out and take a look again at my Weebly website. I will have the PowerPoints up for the last 4 sessions. And if you think it would be of value for Twyla and I to come into your school, your district, or your organization to have one of these discussions, we would be so happy to do that. So in my language, I'm going to raise my hands up to you and I'm going to say Cookstochum for taking the time to be here after a long day, for committing to these 4 sessions if this is your 4th, or to 1 if this is your 1st. Just glad that you took the time to do this important work. And I wish you a beautiful evening. And again, thank you so much for being here. Twyla, do you want any closing thoughts?
I really appreciate the feedback. It helps direct the work we do. And you know, and again, that you're there after work, we appreciate that. We know what that's like. And just that you're a great audience and we enjoyed.
Yeah.
And Molly, my Molly says hi. I don't know if you can see her.
Oh, yeah. I don't always see is the top of a painting, Twy.
Oh,
Oh, there she is. Oh,
there's
there.
my Molly. See, she helps me with the session. Sorry, guys.
Okay.
Yeah, she's sorry.
And my dog is sleeping on the chair back there. I'll let sleeping dogs lie. So Cookstochum, you all take good care of yourselves, and we hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.